When Matvey was born, for the first 3 months, we were in shock. We felt utterly confused and disoriented. When Matvey was about 3 months old, we were all still in the hospital, and I went for a walk in the hospital yard while my loved one stayed with my son. I remember praying as I was passing by the arch, and my heart was super heavy. It was still extremely difficult and scary. And then I heard the following words in my heart: I offer you to surrender your son and place him under my control. Let go of control and trust that I can take better care of him than any doctor, than even you as his parents, no matter how much you love him. And in that moment, as I was praying, I said, Lord, I agree to do all that. And so ever since then, this feeling of acceptance began, the process of faith and restoration, and God didn't let me down. When the war started, my husband and I made a decision to leave Ukraine. Matvey needed special medicines, and we were buying them all abroad. And since all borders were closed and deliveries stopped, we knew we only had enough medicine to last us 8 days, so we needed to leave. Right at that time, my friend invited us to the Netherlands, and so we packed and left. So it took us 5 days to get to the Netherlands. Our first stop was in Lublin. We got an appointment with the doctors there. It was a miracle. We were traveling with a special child. He was on a special diet. All those days I was cooking in the kitchens of people we didn't know. We didn't know what our next stop would be, where and who would host us. But with every stop, we saw how God was with us. And all those 5 days, Matvey simply slept. I mean, he slept through all of our trip. He slept through the night. He would wake up, eat, and go back to sleep. That's how we managed to peacefully reach our destination. It was a great blessing. Every aspect was taken care of. An amazing family welcomed us. We were put into a great house and provided with all of the needed medicine for free. We were simply enveloped with care. All our needs were met: medical, material, accommodation. Everything was great. But out of the blue, my husband and I began noticing Matvey's condition worsening. His health was declining. He started losing weight. For all 8 years of his life, his condition was special but stable and predictable. We had never been to hospitals. Matvey was almost never sick. Maybe once or twice in his entire life he would catch a cold. Everything was stable, and out of nowhere it became unstable. So we started to pray. We waited, but nothing helped. And maybe a year later, his condition became substantially worse. He was admitted to the ICU at the hospital, and the doctors told us he wasn't going to survive. Andrei, my husband, and I prayed for his life, and our son lived. When the doctors came to discharge us from the hospital, both of them sat on the bed, the chief doctor and our doctor, and told us, "It is a miracle. We don't know how it happened. We cannot explain it, but we are discharging you." And so we went home. But we couldn't shake off the feeling that something was different, and we knew that something changed in the spiritual world. I remember I went to the prayer retreat just beforehand, and I had a conversation with Andrei. I asked him, "Do you understand that Matvey may not survive, that the Lord can call him home?" And we discussed that as parents, we need to know God's will and not to stand in the way of God's will, no matter how painful it may be. Until now, we would pray that healing and stability would come, right? And at that time, I could see that our son's condition was becoming steadily worse and worse. Andrei and I decided to pray, and together we prayed this prayer. We wept. It was a very difficult prayer. We prayed for God's will to be done and not ours. And with these thoughts, I went to the summer prayer retreat in Cologne. I approached Rabbi Boris and told him about our situation and asked him to pray with me. And this is what Rabbi and I prayed. Lord, if this is your will, we are not going to stand in your way. If the time has come, please prepare Matvey and prepare us to be ready for this transition. After I came back from the retreat, everything was more or less stable, since the miracle at the hospital had happened right before, and about 2 or 3 months later, Matvey's condition couldn't be worse. It was the hardest period in our lives. It was the hardest period in my life. For about 6 months, we were in and out of the hospital ICUs. Matvey's condition was becoming worse and worse, and our last visit to the hospital was extraordinary. Our host family here in the Netherlands, they usually, well, it's not customary to intervene in somebody else's personal matters and do something without permission. When Janneke came and saw how difficult Matvey's condition was, his temperature went up, and she called the ambulance without my permission. I gave her this look. I was surprised. She had never done anything like that before. And after this whole situation, when we talked, I asked her, "Why did you do that?" She said, "Anya, I don't know. On one hand, I was sorry I acted on an impulse, that I did this impulsive thing. But on the other hand, I knew that it was I don't know, I felt compelled." They're also believers, they believe in God. She said, "I felt that I had to call." So she called that ambulance, they came, listened to him breathing and said he didn't have pneumonia, but offered to take him to the hospital. I said, "If he doesn't have pneumonia, why go to the hospital?" It was very unusual of me because I always tried listening to the doctors. Everything that concerned my child, I was very disciplined. But that time I was strongly protesting, crying. I simply didn't want to go. I don't know, I was shaking all over. My husband said, "We are going." I remember I took offense because he did not support me. I said, "I don't want to go to the hospital this time." And he said, "Anya, we are going." And we went. We came to the hospital, Matvey took a COVID test, it was negative, all good. And everybody was like, "It's time to go home." We spent a couple of hours there, and the doctor who was about to discharge us said, "Wait a moment, I'll finish with the paperwork and you can go." I said, "Okay." We already got dressed and had everything ready to go. The doctor entered ready to discharge us, and Matvey had monitors connected to him measuring his oxygen saturation level. It was 95, but it became 92, 90, 88, 87, 86, 85, 80. In just a few minutes, it dropped to 80 right before the doctor's eyes. We thought something was wrong with the monitors, so we checked all the monitors, every single one. "Well, I see," she said, "I cannot discharge you." That was it. I lost it. I cried. I held a grudge against Andrei. I held a grudge against Janneke because they lured me into the hospital, and because of them, they kept us there. Well, obviously, it wasn't because of them. And they put us into a hospital ward. The night was very difficult. That night there was a reanimation. Matvey was resuscitated with special meds that night. They used medication sprays and injections. They did everything they could, and it sort of helped. The next day it seemed that his condition improved a little bit. We could see that Matvey felt a lot better, but the oxygen saturation levels, the amount of oxygen in blood, was very low. It had improved from 80 to 85, but it still wasn't enough. He was still oxygen deprived. So we began watching Matvey closely. The following day it became even worse than on the first day. They resuscitated him a second time and it failed. They resuscitated him a third time back to back. Nothing happened. They tried a fourth time with 0 results. I couldn't grasp what was happening. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. My son underwent the most effective procedures that used to always help before, but they didn't this time. And the realization began creeping in that something was off. You know how it goes. You simply understand that a person, your child, simply has a high fever, he has some sort of respiratory disease, so why can't doctors help him? I just didn't get it then. Everything seemed so simple. And then I suddenly understood that he was suffering. The doctor said we can't perform any more resuscitation protocols, and Matvey couldn't breathe. That was it. No breathing, and oxygen saturation levels were not 80 anymore, rather 76, 77. And we put an oxygen mask on him. At night he stopped breathing altogether. He couldn't breathe at all. I called the doctors, we were all crying as we saw that our child couldn't take a breath. They said, we can't resuscitate him anymore. I insisted, do it. You have my permission. Do as many as needed, 2, 3, all of them back to back. It doesn't matter. My child cannot breathe. Let's somewhat relieve his suffering. They heard me and did the resuscitation procedures again and again, but it didn't help. After a few hours, I was very confused why doctors wouldn't come to help us when my son was in such a dire condition. Why wouldn't they come? How come? How come they abandoned us? And the doctor finally came. He came and said, I'm sorry to have to say it, but there's nothing else we can do. They did an X-ray, and it turned out that because his brain was damaged, he was 10, well 9, he was supposed to turn 10 in a few months. At some point, his lungs stopped developing. All the other vital organs were developing normally, but at some point, somehow, his lungs stopped growing. They were too small because he developed 10 repeated infections over the course of a year. The breathing capacity of lungs shut down. In other words, his lungs stopped working. And the doctor said, unless he receives some miracle, unfortunately, he will pass in a few days. Andrei and I couldn't believe it. How come he will pass? Though at the summer retreat in Cologne, we prayed and said, we trust you, Lord, and it was December already, and they were saying he wouldn't survive. My brain just couldn't comprehend that he would die, that my child would pass away. How come? How come nothing else could be done? Suddenly it dawned on me that the moment must have come, and I said, there is absolutely nothing else we can do, or is there still something we can try that could help him? They answered, in our opinion, there's nothing else that could help, but we can try one more procedure to get supplemental oxygen to him through his nostrils. They use nasal cannulas to intubate him and deliver a strong flow of warm, oxygenated air, and in that way ventilate lungs through his nostrils. We were transferred to another bigger ward, and as I realized later that it was a pediatric hospice ward. It's quite a big ward, so there is plenty of room for family to be together, to spend the last hours there, to be with the person who is passing, and in our case, with our child. After a few more hours, nothing was working, and the doctor said that most probably that was it. One of the doctors entered and said, Matvey has a strong heart, and it could be days before he passes. let's make it easier for him and connect morphine so the child could sleep and not suffer. In other words, they wanted to make this transition easier for him. Andrei and I prayed, talked to Matvey, told him that the Lord was waiting for him, that he had his angels ready to show him the way, that he was going to the best place, the one he can only imagine. And we told him that we were definitely going to meet him again, that we were happy for him, that his suffering was coming to an end. We said, we are not happy that we have to say goodbye for now. We will miss you, but we are happy that this is God's perfect timing. We told him that the most perfect time is when the Lord is calling. It is the best. We told him that he lived a great life, and that's how we said goodbye. And that morphine was coming in. They turned off the device that was delivering oxygenated air because it was simply unnecessary, and they just let us be alone with him in those last minutes. All the time I was holding him in my arms while we were in the hospital. We spent 4 days there. All the time he was either in my arms or in my husband's. Since he couldn't lie on the bed, he was suffocating, and it was easier for him when he was held almost vertically. And after all, it's more comfortable when your parents hold you and love you. A child feels safe with their parents. And there is a tradition in the hospital. At the sensitive moments of passing, the doctors never enter the ward. They have a special room where they have data from all the monitors of the child, where they can hear all the sounds, but they don't intervene into this personal space during those important moments in life of saying the last goodbyes and transition. They try to give this space. And so we were sitting there, and I see that Matvey's oxygen saturation levels dropped. It was 60, and all of a sudden it became 40. I was afraid. And at that moment, a knock on the door, our doctor peeked in. He is a tall Dutch man with white curly hair like an angel. He had this big hair, and all this time it was gloomy outside, and at that moment the sun came out. The Dutch like to make these huge windows, and through these windows the sun began to shine brightly. And this Dutch doctor, this angel, looks in, and through his hair the light comes in like this. I looked at him and I said, "Come in," because it was already a bit scary. We understood that we said goodbye to Matvey, we knew that this was God's will, and it was such a strong presence of God in the ward that it was impossible to endure. It was supernatural, it was incomprehensible. It didn't fit in our heads because our son was making the transition, and probably his brain was already dead, most likely. But at the same time, you feel such a strong presence of him, such a thick presence, as if the whole room was saturated with him. And we realized that the moment of life and death merged. And this transition was so real. And there was such a peace inside. Nobody was crying. There was no fear. And this doctor came in and he said, "Can I come in?" I said, "Yes, please, come in." And he explained to us that most likely the brain was probably already dead. And I said, "I'd like to put Matvey on the bed as a sign that we said goodbye, that we did everything, and there was no point in holding the body in my arms. I had an urge to do so. I said, I'd like to put him on the bed, if you could help me. And before that, the doctor explained, he told us that he had a strong heart and that it could take several hours, from 2 to 10 hours, for the child's body to die completely. And I said, okay, but I realized that I wouldn't be able to hold him for another 10 hours. And I said, help me please to put him on the bed. And he said, sure. I put him down, and Andrei and I could feel that presence of God. We assumed that maybe Matvey's soul was still there with us, and we said this last thing, Matyusha, bye. Well, it was like a sign again that we let him go, blessed him, and that was it. So I put him down. The doctor said, well, let's do it like this, that is, let's put him comfortably enough. And at that moment we looked at the vitals that were shown there at the monitors, and the saturation level was 40, 39, 38, 32, 20, 24, 18, 10, 4, 0. And everywhere goes 0, like this, you know, like in the movies. Beep. The doctor raised his eyes and looked at me and said, I've never experienced such a strong spiritual presence in my life. And yet it cannot be. How is that? You just said goodbye to him. You said your last words. And it was like he heard you. He said goodbye to you too and left. It was such an easy transition. It was a transition that a non-believing doctor, an atheist to the core, as he told us afterwards, doctor said it was my first spiritual experience. And then when there was a funeral, we had a very special funeral. All the Dutch people could not comprehend it. We had a sermon. The translation was in 2 languages, Dutch and English. And everyone in the neighborhood, in our beautiful, rich village, everyone remembered how Christians say goodbye and how the transition takes place. And this doctor also attended the funeral. He came, and we were sitting at the table afterwards, and he said, your case opened the way for my soul to God. And today I'm sure that there is a God. And today I know that the spiritual world is real, and I am no longer an atheist. After the funeral, 3 weeks after, there is also this special service. When you go to the doctors, you have an opportunity to ask all the questions you want, what you have digested in 3 weeks, and you have some questions formed. You can come and ask them to the doctor. As we were sitting there, we just thanked them for their care, and the senior doctor said, your case has gone viral in the hospital. We have never, he said, I have never in my long history as a doctor, and he has been working in the hospital for over 20 years. He is quite an old man. I've never met such a family with so much love. Your case has gone viral throughout our hospital. Everybody knows about Matvey. Everybody knows about his transition. The nurses just cannot stop talking about this case. Everybody knows you. If you come to our wing, you will discover that everybody knows about you and how the Lord visited this transition. This is our story.